and severe depression for most of my life, although it wasn't until the past decade that I had language around what I was experiencing as a child. Additionally, what started as an ambiguous flare with pain and nausea, limited vision as a child, once or twice a year, became a full-fledged condition that disrupted my life in 2015 onwards. And so, in that way, pain and medication are two of my closest friends. In my paper, I desire to look at the clearing from the brilliant Toni Morrison as she sketches out for us in her book, Beloved. This fictional clearing space has captivated many audiences in its subversive depiction of a fully embodied Black spirituality. This space holds dignity for those whom the world deemed outsider and not enough. As we peer into this imaginative and spacious refuge, I desire to put Black disabled people at the center of what we think about, what we imagine for our institutions and our interpersonal relationships. Is this a place for Black disabled people? I believe it is. The very magic of the clearing seems to be instigated by a Black disabled woman. Think about that. I don't often hear that, right? Baby Suggs Holy was. In the opening of chapter 9, we find this profoundly disabled preacher who has been disabled by the horrors of slavery and white supremacy and heartache and pain. So I'm thankful for Mother Morrison and all that she has offered to our imagination and Black spirituality. And with her beautiful canvas, I open my great big heart, boldly but gently. I want to name those Black folks who aren't explicitly called out in this roll call of bodies. I name the autistic, those with autoimmune complications, the stutterers, those suffering under migraines, the pained, the traumatized, those with depression and PTSD and anxiety. Let them come and take their place among us. So now I'm going to ask you to use your imagination a bit as I read a bit of this passage from Beloved. If it helps you, just take a deep breath. I know we're already in this good place from Rose. Close your eyes if that helps you, if you're able to, and take a deep breath. When warm weather came, baby Suggs Holy, followed by every Black man, woman, and child who could make it through, took her great heart to the clearing. A wide open place cut deep in the woods, nobody knew for what, at the end of the path known only to deer and whoever cleared the land in the first place. In the heat of every Saturday afternoon, she sat in the clearing while the people waited among the trees. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down. Then she shouted, "Let the children come." And they ran from the trees towards her. "Let your mothers hear you laugh," she told them, and the woods rang. The adults looked on and could not help but smile. Then, "Let the grown men come," she shouted. They stepped out one by one from among the ringing trees. "Let your wives and your children see you dance," she told them, and ground life shuddered under their feet. Finally, she called the women to her. "Cry," she told them, "for the living and the dead, just cry." And without covering their eyes, the women let loose. It started that way, laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Women stopped crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced. All and each lay about the clearing, damp and gasping for breath. In the silence that followed, baby Suggs, Holy, offered up to them her great big heart. She did not tell them to clean up their lives or go and sin no more. She did not tell them they were blessed of the earth, its inheriting meek, or its glory bound pure. She told them that the only grace that they could have was the grace they could imagine. That if they could not see it, they would not have it. Here, she said, in this here place, we flesh. Flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet and grass. Love it hard. Ashe. So this passage is beautifully emotional. The joy, the tears, all of it beautiful. Have you heard or read this passage? And I can't help but think of the song Cheek to Cheek. I'm older, so this may not resonate with some. So it is a beautiful song that weaves together, Ella Fitzgerald, and a story of two people so entranced with one another that they're almost in a heavenly emotional clearing together. I could hear Ella's voice as she says, heaven. I'm in heaven. I'm not going to sing it to y'all. That would be something different. And my heart beats so that I can hardly speak. And I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. In my research and work with disability theology and disability justice, I have felt a distinct lack of resources with an intersectional and a multidisciplinary approach, especially with understanding what it means to be disabled and multiply marginalized racially. And what do I mean by disabled? Sins Invalid has 10 principles that they go by when approaching the concept and actions of disability justice, but I'll just use the CDC's definition to ground us. A disability is any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. Think about that definition and how often some people feel that they cannot approach the concept of disability. So this definition has weight for Black people especially, who in many instances find it extremely complicated to claim that title. While some disability theologians quickly try to redeem the term disabled, it is important to note that the route to disability is vastly different, particularly for those of us who find ourselves disabled because of racist systemic issues and our environment. Some may ask, is this what God intended for us? So I want to highlight the work of Dr. Sammy Schalk and her work with Black disability studies. And she writes, Black disability studies explores both the lives of Black disabled people and the relationship between race and disability as systems of privilege and oppression. Black disability study scholarship traces how disability has appeared among Black people, how disability has been treated and understood within these communities, and how Blackness and disability have been and continue to be discursively linked. To be clear, disability among us is visible and invisible. It is layered. Dr. Monica Coleman, the great and the wonderful, talks about her journey with mental health, and she says, and her faith, and she says, no one diagnosed my great-grandfather with depression. No one diagnosed grandma. Who's to know or care about the mental and emotional state of sharecroppers from South Carolina? And who can stop to think of a clinical illness when the children need to be fed? So let us return to the clearing. In that place, when you think about it, there are at least 6 components that I want to highlight. One, warm weather that shapes it, and nature. It takes place in a particular place and time when warm weather came and a wide open place cut deep in the woods. I have sat in wooded areas of Georgia that remind me of this exact scene. About a year or so ago, I found myself broken by my physical health and diagnosis by the backdrop of the pandemic we are currently living through, and my mind was sick in ways that I can't begin to describe. Additionally, I was weary with white supremacy down to my very marrow. And during this period, a friend flew me out to Georgia, and we went into the woods where he allowed me to cry. The warmth, the smells, and here with this friend, I felt transported to the clearing where I could almost hear baby Suggs' words echoing in my mind and heart. I wept for what I was experiencing and the possibility that I could, for just a moment, take a Black disabled breath. Dr. Melanie Harris writes extensively about eco-memory, eco-womanism, and eco-justice, and how Black people have a certain relationship with nature. And I experienced that there in my own clearing. She says, while it is more complicated, talking about her own experience, to rationalize the sense of home that I also feel when I return to the dark woods of Mississippi, it is often there in the bosom of family, in the safety of collective memory and song and hope, that I continue to find strength in the face of fighting the structural evil of white supremacy. What manner of people and what message do we find in the clearing for Black disabled folks? Well, all manner of folks are there, right? Men, women, children, those who are escaping the routine of the world, those who need to laugh, clearly, those who need to cry, those who need a ray of hope. I think of our current day and the wisdom and God talk that we need centered around us as Black disabled folks, whether it is rapper Megan Thee Stallion detailing her severe mental health struggles on her latest album, Traumazine. Yeah. I like it. You won't hear that often in disability theology. It's a good one. It's a resource. Or actor Tyler James Williams' battle with Crohn's disease, disability, and our own sacredness runs deep. In this place, baby Suggs opens her great big heart. She says, "Yonder, they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Love your hands, love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together," she says. "Stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest and to dance. Backs that need support, shoulders that need arms. More than lungs that have yet to draw free air, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving parts. Hear me now, for this is the prize," she says. This is a message of sacredness. For the Black bodies, a message of body nurturing flesh and spirituality. A message that examines all the different ways that Blackness is maligned and put down outside of the clearing. There is a need for refuge. For the Black people who aren't able to breathe freely, dance, cry, and laugh in the wider world, where capitalism and white supremacy and death-dealing ideologies are set upon us. What wisdom can we learn from Black disabled flesh? I really want to set that in your mind. Furthermore, this message is for all of us if we will incline our understanding. For a society bent on profit and productivity harm us all in extensive ways. We need a message of hope. Finally, silence is a part of the clearing too. There are so many things that you can pick up when you allow yourself to gather communally, express yourself, and allow silence to descend. Black disabled people are suffering and our needs are varied, but much of that suffering is under the weight of systems in society that compound our disability. I recently went through a whole inclusive pedagogy training on disability in the classroom and teaching, and guess what? Almost all of the teachers were white, and the issues that they addressed, especially in the Theological Academy, were about white disabled bodies. Think about what that says to the wisdom that we possess. The message is clear: only white disabled bodies matter, even in the academy. So as I close my time with you all today, I want to address the hope that awaits Black disabled people in the clearing. Community and salvation are there for us. Cole Arthur Riley says in her book, This Here Flesh, a community can mean a household, a local body, a shared identity that stretches across the globe. But it can also mean a group that knows your name, where everybody knows your name. For the older folks, people who know you and know about the ugly parts of you and stay. And stay. A community where you're known and you're allowed to move forward, right? So in that place, there is no time for ambiguity. She also writes about salvation. She says, as someone who is made of more doubt than faith, I find that Christians tend to want to talk to me about salvation. They seem quite concerned with the future of my faith, but they make the mistake of showing little interest in my present conditions. If asked to choose, I want a God who is someplace. Black disabled people, a God who is someplace, amen? We need the ability to bring our understanding to bear to determine if a theology has a place for our diverse experiences. We take the clearing, baby Suggs' beautiful heart and the wisdom, and we create a clearing for ourselves. As Monica Coleman says, a way out of no way. Amen.
We're going to, since it seems to be functioning on Zoom, we're going to be inviting Lauren for you to start with us on Zoom. I will reread your bio so that everybody on Zoom can hear. But I'm going to invite all of us who are present in person to either log in on our phones or laptops in here, or also we'll kind of put together a table out there in the library atrium if you want to watch it kind of together, gathered around one computer. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. I appreciate everybody's patience with all of this, and we look forward to hearing Lauren's presentation. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lauren. Creatureliness as Blessed Interdependence is the title of this presentation. And this will be presented by Lauren Lippincott from Duke Divinity School. Lauren Lippincott is a fourth-year Master of Divinity student at Duke Divinity School in Durham, North Carolina, as well as a graduate certificate student in global health at the Duke Global Health Institute. Her research interests include the intersections of theology, disability, health equity, and interdependence. She also serves as the Director of Faith Formation at Good Shepherd United Church of Christ in Cary, North Carolina, and is pursuing ordination in the United Church of Christ. All right. Thank you, Lauren, for being with us today. And whenever you're ready, please feel free to start on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody, but thanks for sticking with us. I'm excited to join you all virtually this morning and present what is my thesis research from my time at Duke, which is Creatureliness as Blessed Interdependence. One second, I'm just gonna mute. Creatureliness as Blessed Interdependence, a disability-informed theological anthropology for engaging limits as gifts. Can y'all hear me okay? I just want to make sure before I get started. Okay, perfect.
Why is it called room 112? It's kind of weird.
Well, I think that's just probably the physical location that we're gonna film.
That is right.
Okay, so.
That is right. So what happened here? Picture.
Let me get this started real quick. One second.
This is... Come on back now. Come on back now.
I'll go ahead and get started if y'all can hear me. The current American culture is fascinated by, if not obsessed with, the ideals of independence and individual freedom. Yet these cultural ideals do not serve to empower all its citizens, but instead serves as a mirage, promising the false hope of blessed independence through hard work, intellectual and physical capacity, and upward mobility. This idea leaves people behind at best, and at worst, purposely oppresses those whose public and social lives are marked by dependency, such as disabled people. Within this cultural imagination, disability itself has almost become synonymous with dependence, whether in the form of caretakers or forced institutionalization. This has shaped the perception of disabled people as those who tragically embody our nation's greatest fears. Christian theology, however, specifically its theology of creation, has long challenged these concepts of human independence, and many theologians have advocated for a theological anthropology of interdependence. As I hope to demonstrate in this presentation, a disability-informed theology of creation provides a powerful corrective to the American cultural obsession with independence by illuminating humanity's divinely ordained interdependence on the whole of creation. Through the lens of disability theology, we learn the beauty of embracing our creaturely limits, not as a deficit to be feared or overcome, but rather as a gift through which we discover what it means to be truly human. This reclamation of our creaturehood beckons us to recover our role within creation and reshapes our relationship with the earth. Christian theology has long been concerned with conceptions of freedom and the distinctiveness of the creator from the creation. One theologian who wrote extensively about this distinction is Rowan Williams. For Williams, there was much at stake in the development of a substantive theology of creation and the reclamation of our creaturely identity. For he believed being a creature is in danger of becoming a lost art. According to Williams, a proper theology of creation must begin with a robust theology of the creator, who creates in absolute freedom. In God's boundless freedom, God calls creation to be. Herein lies the ultimate distinction between creator and creation. The creator is wholly free and infinite, while that which is created is finite and experiences freedom only within these divinely set bounds. However, the freedom of the creator is not something used against the creation as an imposition of power, but instead is used in love for the sake of the creation. In fact, Williams writes, God's act of creation gratuitously establishes God as the one who is supremely there for the world. It seems we must say that God is already one whose being is a being for, whose joy is eternally in the joy of another. This character of the divine creator thus shapes the creation, which is the self-expressive work of the creator. Because the creator is said to be for another, so too the creation is created interdependent. Jürgen Moltmann also conceives of a similar idea of the creator-creator relation through his theology of the Trinitarian relationship. Moltmann conceives the Trinitarian God as one who exists in a complex, interwoven relation of love. He writes in his book, God in Creation, creation was called into being out of the inner love which the eternal God is. Moltmann believes that this has profound ethical implications for how we exist as creatures exist within the world. In the same way that the Trinity exists in mutuality and relationality, so too does creation. He states, to be alive means existing in relationship with other people and things. Life is communication in communion. This bold claim highlights the primacy of relationships and interdependence in the production of a theological anthropology. Another prominent theologian whose theology of creation serves helpful for this paradigm is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. In his seminal work, Creation and Fall, he develops a rich theology, not only of the act of creation, but also a powerful account of what it means to be creatures. Bonhoeffer helpfully highlights that the language of freedom in the Hebrew Bible does not connote a capacity, an ability, or indeed even a quality that humanity possesses, but rather explains freedom in the following way. Being free means being free for the other, because I am bound to the other. Only by being in relationship with the other am I free. Freedom in this way is always constituted in relationship with fellow creation, both human and non-human. Paramount to this construction of a disability theology of creation is Bonhoeffer's belief that the key to defining our creatureliness is a proper understanding of our embodied limits. And because of these divinely given limits, our need for interdependence. Instead of conceiving humanity's natural limits as something to loathe or attempt to overcome, he writes about limits in a novel way, saying, the limit is grace because it is the basis of creatureliness and freedom. The boundary is the center of human existence. Unlike the absolute freedom of the creator, the creature's freedom rests not in its independence from others, but rather in its finitude, in the very human experience of limited embodiment. And the existence of an interdependence on fellow creation is the precise mechanism by which humanity is sustained for life within these limits. I contend here that the key to crafting a disability-informed theological anthropology is offered in Bonhoeffer's account of creatureliness as the embracing of our embodied limits. Within Bonhoeffer's framework, each member of creation is made distinct and diverse, and each contains within its very essence an essential piece of the divine order. Difference, whether in bodily ability or another category, is part of the divine plan for sustaining creation. Bonhoeffer describes that this interdependence upon one another does not collapse our individual limits and differences, but rather becomes the basis for our belonging to one another. Bonhoeffer believes that the love of another person actually helps us to bear our own limits. When this belonging to another is missing, it is detrimental to our creatureliness. About this, he writes, where love for the other is obliterated, a human being can only hate the limit. A person then desires only in an unbounded way to possess the other or destroy the other. It is this phenomenon that takes place in American culture with the systemic oppression of disabled people. Our culture has often grown to hate the limits of embodied humanity and sought in fear to overcome and oppress those who most remind us of our own limits. What would happen instead if we learn to embrace our limits as a sacred gift? Disability theology and the lived experiences of disabled people have much to teach us here. In her book, Disability and Christian Theology, Embodied Limits and Constructive Possibilities, disability theologian Deborah Creamer discusses the significance of embracing the natural limits of our embodied experience. She constructs what she names a limits model of theological anthropology, which, quote, attends to the fluidity of human embodiment, and most particularly the claim that limits are an unsurprising aspect of being human. Like Bonhoeffer, Creamer believes that limits are a vital component of the human experience, and rather than seeing them as a deficit, she calls for a reclamation of our limits as valuable, something that inspires creativity and even leads us closer to God. She describes how in American culture, we typically conceptualize limitedness as a constraint, a lack of a needed resource, or even a barrier. However, properly understood in this theological perspective, limits are inherent in the nature of humanity, which God has named in creation very good. She contends that the limits of humanity and the subsequent need for interdependence constitutes our essential communal identity as created beings. Creamer beckons us to not simply stop here at accepting our limits as natural, and pushes us forward to imagine how this view moves us to reshape our relationships. She writes, once we recognize that limits are unsurprising, we can then move not only to a perspective where we embrace, value, accept, and respect the idea of having limits as individuals and as communities, but can also notice ways in which these limits might embrace us, acting to make and unmake issues of identity, relationality, space, and place. One important way in which this limits model helps us is in the reshaping of our relationships with people along a vast spectrum of bodily disabilities and abilities. When disabled and temporarily able-bodied people see each other as deeply essential to our own sense of self and community identity, mutual flourishing becomes possible. As Amos Young helpfully reminds us, there is no meeting of human beings, disabled or otherwise, as whole persons apart from our own embodiment. That is, we meet each other in all of our limits and difference. Our embodiment becomes an important site for engaging with others across a diverse spectrum of bodily ability and disability. As Nancy Eastland states in her groundbreaking work, The Disabled God, thus for the temporarily able-bodied, developing an empathy for people with disabilities means identifying with their own real bodies, bodies of contingency and limits. In this way, coming to terms with our embodied experience aids us in the reclamation of our contingency, as well as in the flourishing of relationships between persons with and without disabilities. This limits-focused model challenges the typical restrictive and exclusionary models of difference that shape our culture and leads us to recognize diversity and difference as essential to our communal well-being. Disability theologian and scholar Rebecca Spurrier, in her book, The Disabled Church, describes the importance that interdependence, which she describes through the language of weaving, played in her research with disabled and non-disabled participants in the ecclesial setting. She writes, during my time as a researcher, the metaphor and image of weaving became central to my understanding of how a community of difference is held together across persistent hierarchies and divisions, without ignoring the different abilities, statuses, and resources of members. It is in the artful weaving together of persons with a variety of embodied limits that the community is built and nurtured. Spurrier helpfully reminds us that the mutuality that constitutes our creatureliness does not ignore difference, but rather it pays close particular attention. Put another way, the unique limits of each creature are not dissolved, but rather, as she says, unexpected mutuality arises in the complex web of relationships we are woven into with our fellow creatures. Other non-disabled or other non-religious disability scholars also raise interdependence as an important ecological concept. Disability feminist scholar Sunara Taylor writes in her chapter, Interdependent Animals, a Disability Feminist Ethic of Care, dependency is real, but the point is that we all exist along its spectrum. The challenge is to understand dependency not simply as negative and certainly not as unnatural, but rather as an integral part of being alive. It is simply not possible for humans to untangle themselves from the complex webs of interdependence into which we are woven. We are bound not only to other humans, but also to the earth. The reality is, as she writes, the whole planet is interdependent. Yet it is not only these non-religious scholars who highlight the interdependence with the natural world. Many Christian scholars have also written extensively about this primal interconnection. Bonhoeffer again proves helpful in this area. Bonhoeffer claims that the second aspect of creaturely freedom includes being bound to creation as that for which humanity has been commissioned to care. In this commission, it is incorrect to assume that humans can dominate nature and strip it of its resources. Rowan Williams writes about this assumption, how bizarre a distortion it has been to think that the human spirit imitates God by exploitative mastery. Rather, we embrace our creatureliness by our care for that which God also created. If humans fail to see the world as fellow beloved creation, then we miss the essence of humankind as a creature. Instead, Bonhoeffer helpfully ties our creatureliness to our connection with the earth, writing, in my whole being, in my creatureliness, I belong wholly to this world. It bears me, nurtures me, holds me. This earth that we are commissioned to care for is also the earth out of which we were created and to which we are consequentially bound. We exist, therefore, within an interdependent relationship with the rest of the created world. Moltmann describes our creatureliness as a covenant with nature, in which the rights of human beings and the rights of the earth are respected and balanced out. Only by accepting and reclaiming the limits of our own creatureliness can we begin to mend our strained and even severed relationship with our fellow creation, the earth. In this presentation, I have sought to reclaim a vision of creatureliness as blessed interdependence through a disability-informed theology of creation. Through traditional theological resources, the rich and diverse experience of disability, and a new evaluation of our limits, I have sought to counter and deconstruct the fallacy of independence that courses through our culture. The alternative I have proposed, the recovery of our limits as creatures, seeks that primordial freedom given to us by the Creator in the act of creation, the freedom which comes through our interdependence upon a diversity of others. This model of embracing creaturely limits as a gift of the Creator to the creation not only helps us become at home within our own embodied experience, but also builds real relational possibilities across a diverse spectrum of disability and ability, and leads to the flourishing of all. This relational possibility extends not only to the diverse experiences found within humanity, but also to the entirety of creation, the land, the animals, the plants, and indeed the whole natural world. This paradigm shapes not only our relationships with other humans, but also seeks to reconcile our relationship with the earth as the one which bears us and which we have been commissioned to care for. Within this interdependent schema, When one part of creation embraces its creatureliness, the whole creation flourishes. Thank you.
Let's see. Vinay, can you begin?
Yes, I just wanted to check if I'm audible.
Yes, you are. To
Yeah,
Zoom
great.
participants, are you audible? Zoom participants, can you type in the chat if you can hear? Okay, I'm hearing yes, we can hear you. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, it's a beginning of the night here in India, but I suppose there it's the morning. So I wish you all a very good morning. My name is Vinay Suhalka, and I speak to you from the city of Mumbai in India. Actually, I had made some slides, but I eventually decided not to use it. So I'm going to read from my paper. I begin by thanking the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my work in the form of this paper titled Embodied Faith, Exploring Relationality and Interdependence Through Disabled Bodies in Mumbai. The paper has been placed in this concurrent session aptly titled Living Out Disability Theology Today, and that suits my focus on the lived experiences of disability instead of thinking about how disability is represented. Before I begin, I would like to give some backdrop to how I have been able to conceive faith in the idioms of interdependency and relationality. When I began fieldwork for my doctoral project centered around faith of people with disability, particularly those with mobility impairments in the metropolis of Mumbai, I was struck by how the understandings of faith that I had familiarized myself through literature till then appeared empirically untenable in the lives of those who I was attempting to study. Thus, conceptions of faith as an ultimate concern, in words of theologian Paul Tillich or James Fowler's thinking of faith as human beings' quest for meaning, felt fine when I read them, but when I actually interrogated faith along these lines, I often found that my participants did not share any such grand notions about faith. They regularly spoke about their lives, not as individuals, but always in relational terms. Nevertheless, what could be the ultimate concern of someone living with limited bodily resources, struggling with livelihood and employment issues, apart from really trying, keeping on existing within the network of dependency and care work generated by the fact of bodily conditions of disability, particularly limited mobility in a not so disability friendly city in terms of infrastructure like Mumbai. Furthermore, I also could not make sense of faith as necessarily private, singular, and unmediated act located in the realm of interiority. This I learned later through engaging with anthropology of religion, that such conceptions of faith had come to be identified with universal definitions of religion that were coming from specific understandings of Protestant Christianity, which was uncritically taken to mean same across cultures and religions, as if faith is everywhere, regardless of times and spaces, the same. By engaging particularly with the works of anthropologist Talal Asad, who argued against essentialist stance imbued in these concepts, I have been able to think of faith in relational terms. It was from his work that I developed the notion of faith as, and I quote him, a relationship created through, maintained by, and expressed in practice, unquote. Such a faith does not result from belief in the sense of state of mind or an assent to a proposition or in the form of some creedal affirmation, but is mediated through practice, which includes other people. Faith is therefore not a mental disposition, but includes the whole body. Faith comes alive in the idiom of relationality and intersubjectivity when Assad says, my concern is with the way the living body subjectifies itself through images, practices, institutions, programs, objects, and through other living bodies. With an emphasis on the living bodies, he is really arguing to locate faith in relational terms. His writings thus helped me make sense of my fieldwork findings on which this paper is based. To think about faith as embedded within a network of family and kin relationships, as well as with the state and various charitable and non-governmental organizations, both secular as well as religious. Such faith is always embodied and rooted through the body, in this case through an impaired and limited body, where the disabled body is at the center of how faith is enacted and experienced by people with disability whose lives foregrounds this paper. Before I briefly discuss the idea of interdependence and relationality through life experiences of one of my research respondents, I want to situate this paper within the Indian context. And I believe this is especially important since other papers have spoken about the American context, which is markedly different from Indian context. Uh, and this is also important because most of the methodological tools to study disability come from a Euro-American context, where disability studies as a discipline developed against the backdrop of civil rights and independent living movement. Thus, to study both religion as well as disability in an Indian context or in an Eastern context would require one to calibrate the methodological tools to suit the context. Both notions of what constitutes bodily difference as well as religion are never settled or taken for granted issues. When I embarked on my research journey, I thought it would be easy for me to talk about what we call as religion and faith with my respondents. But I soon realized them but I soon realized that asking them, "Do you believe in God?" would not yield anything I could draw an inference from, especially in the light of their bodily conditions and disability. I gradually realized, especially after situating myself in anthropology of religion, as against a lot of theological studies on disability that I had read, particularly those coming from Christian theology, that in order to locate faith, belief, and religion, I will have to keep in mind following scholars like T.N. Madan, who argued that religion in India is not a distinct and discrete aspect of social life, but it virtually influences all social life and it is very much imbued in social practices of people that penetrate aspects like family, marriages, kin group, and the like. Therefore, in order to better locate faith and belief, I must, in a typical anthropological fashion, interrogate these aspects in the local social worlds instead of simply looking at people with disability as only individuals. Here in India, and perhaps in many Eastern contexts, social processes are very important in how faith is shaped, and social relations are seen as prior to and constitutive of the person, rather than as external to and derived from it. Thus, I located my respondents similarly in their social relationships instead of thinking of them as having an inner God, thereby making faith singular as a matter between them and their God. Now, why I have discussed this contextualization is also to argue that local contexts are very important while doing disability studies anywhere, as Benedict Inkstead and Susan Reynolds White pointed in their landmark edited volume in 1995 titled Disability and Culture. Similarly, Constance Furey, working within the academic field of religious studies, has also argued for locating the religious subject as a participant in intimate relationships defined by the problems and pleasures of kinship, friendship, marriage, and other relationships less easily named. Further, my focus on faith as embodied also comes from a call to ground bodies in studies of religion. Thus, while the body has made a resurgence, we still do not come across many studies, especially studies of religion, that ground a non-normative, particularly an impaired and limited body, except perhaps theological studies that do take account of disabled bodies. Therefore, my project from which this paper has emerged centers disabled body to think about faith and belief and is attentive towards the body, the senses, exchange between bodies. How does the impaired body shapes various practices, for instance? Recalling Asad, who formulates practice as an activity that depends on the developed capacities, the cultivated sensorium of the living body, and that in its engagement with material objects and social conditions makes meaningful experience possible. I too have situated faith through a disabled body, its senses, and its relationship with other living bodies and material conditions. I now briefly present experiences of one of my respondents that I gathered during my fieldwork to talk about relationality and interdependence to situate faith and belief. The case I offer is that of Swati, it's a pseudonym, who was 50 when I first met her and 52 when she passed away of COVID in 2021, somewhat alone, cut off from her larger family, but surrounded by unknown COVID patients in one of the jumbo COVID centers that the Municipal Corporation of Mumbai built in April 2021. Over the course of many interviews with her and her sister, who was a primary caregiver after their mother passed away, Swati's life course unfolded gradually to me. In her passing away, of which her sister informed me, it was as if her life course was complete. Her life challenged her normatively held ideas about what a life course should be. It was instead predominantly shaped by the fact of her impairment and subsequent disability. She had acquired polio as a child when she was 1 and lived with post polio paralysis throughout her life, with both her legs below waist affected, along with a hand which was partially affected. This significantly affected her mobility and ambulation. She said, I owe my life to my parents who made great efforts to even make me live as my health really deteriorated after the attack of polio. At the age of 19, when she finished her school, through an NGO, she was allotted a telephone booth, which was then called a handicapped PCO, a term that she used. Now, of course, such a vocabulary is not used. The telephone booth became Swati's life, where she was assisted by both her parents taking turns. In the heyday of landline telephone in India, Jagrati Swati seemed to be earning well until a few years ago when business went down because of the mobile phone revolution in India. After her father died in a tragic road accident when she was around 21, she took on the role of the head of the family, being its primary provider protector, even while she herself required assistance in going to the booth in a tricycle donated by a local charity. But even to shift from the ground to the tricycle and from the tricycle to the chair at the booth and vice versa at the end of the day required great physical efforts in which her mother and after her death, her sister assisted her day after day. Thus, the fact of her financial independence was made possible by her and her caregivers' bodily efforts. She never married because her family considered her bodily condition too severe to be taken care of by another family. Their concern was, will they be able to take care of her as we do? Swati's younger sister told me, recounting their dead mother's thoughts. While Swati dealt with her father's death bravely, as she pointed out to me, her mother's death really broke her down to no extent. She said, in my 50 years of life, I had not been away from her even for 50 minutes. I wish I had gone before her. Almost teary eyed, she remarked this. In her wish, she really inverted the normative understanding of the life course where children do not or should not die before their parents. When I asked when I asked that would not her mother be pained to see her daughter go off in front of her, she responded, and I quote, well, you may be right, but even she may have gone with this thought about who will care for my daughter after me. Think about it as a mother. She must have also gone in this pain, in this worry in her mind. Who will look after my daughter? This was what she was always thinking, even when she was 76 years old. Unquote. There were other reasons Swati was really inseparable from her mother. Her bodily condition severely affected her movement and mobility, as I pointed out earlier. Thus, for many years, the only two places she was at were her home and her booth, situated at a short distance from her home. She never thought of going anywhere else besides these places. However, an opportunity provided by a local Jain religious charity, she was a follower of Jainism. An opportunity provided by local Jain religious charity to perform pilgrimages at the holiest shrines of Jainism attracted Jagrati, since these were the places, according to her, even the non-disabled people find it difficult to go. And here I was getting this opportunity to travel with my mother, and all the arrangements, including the finances, will be taken care of by the religious charity. She further added that these were most pious places associated with the very history of Jainism. These pilgrimages were on ancient routes with shrines situated atop mountains scattered in various parts of India. After much move back and forth by her mother, owing to how will I take care of my daughter in these unknown places, she finally relented, and because of Swati, her disabled daughter, she also got an opportunity to perform these pilgrimages and earn religious merit. Thus, the mother-daughter duo traveled and performed pilgrimage journeys on group pilgrimages organized only for the handicapped people, supported by a network of charitable organizations and volunteers who would often have to lift Swati by her arms where the wheelchair could not go. They even helped her perform rituals that are usually performed at these sites. Swati's assisted performance of these journeys earned her valuable addition to her personhood. Not only she did something that even non-disabled people rarely got the opportunity, but her mother too, through a relational bond with her daughter, as well as both her mother and caregiver, achieved punya or merit. Faith in this case was embodied, a disabled body out in an unfamiliar terrain performing arduous pilgrimage held by unknown volunteers from the larger religious community. It was also deeply relational since Swati enacted her faith through her desire to perform these journeys with her mother, who she never wished to be separated from. Thus, this is faith rooted in what Asad calls practice, which includes the sensorium, the living body, and its engagement with other living bodies, focusing on relationality that really makes meaningful experience possible. This faith was also interdependent, since it was not merely Swati being dependent on her mother for caregiving needs, but even her mother eventually comes to depend on her for these important journeys, because the way these journeys are framed by local religious groups as pilgrimages exclusively for disabled people who can be accompanied by one attendant on these journeys. Thus, it is the relational idiom between the two that shapes and situates faith, not as an assent to proposition, but as mediated and embedded in a shared network of people, practices, places, and materiality of the disabled body. Finally, to conclude, I've attempted to show in this brief discussion how faith might be thought of and conceived differently through a focus on disabled bodies which exist in relational idioms with other people. Following anthropology of religion, this formulation of faith and disability has important consequences when disability is studied in non-Western contexts like India, where the notions of bodily difference have to be historically informed and rooted in local cultures. There cannot be any universal or unitary experience of disability, where people's lives are intersubjective. A focus on disability and social relations around it can reveal important ways in which relationality and interdependence shape ways in which people with disability embody and enact their faith. In particular, in the working class and lower middle class urban slum settlements in which I carried out participant observation and qualitative interviews, life is lived communally and in close proximity with neighbors, kinfolk, and community members. Practices of faith can hardly be set apart and privatized. Indeed, these are often shared activities which are created and sustained within particular relational networks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Do we have enough time for questions? Good question. From all of our presenters? Okay. Okay. I want to also note, if you look in the discussion guide, for those of you on Zoom or here, you can find all of the different emails from our presenters today, so you to reach out to them beyond that. But yeah. Okay, we have one question in the room.
Hello. We're going to take, as I said, we're going to take 2 questions now for these presenters, but in our room that's open later in the day, we'll have more room for discussion. Thank you.
I'll look on Zoom.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alexis Padilla. I was born and raised in Venezuela, so I'm coming from a sense of brownness and embodiment for these questions. I have really 2 questions, and I hope these are not the 2 questions you guys are going to take. But one is for Robert, and one is for our friend from India. I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to pronounce your name because I may do it inappropriately. For Robert, I would like to ask how he sees the clearing as a cross-coalitional disability justice context for non-Black folks. The picture in the novel, we just went through that a couple of weeks ago. It's all for Black folks who are basically escaping from the slave connection to come to this place. It's for Black. Even Sami Shaw says in her most recent book that she's writing for Black. So I have this question for cross-coalitional connections. And for our friend in India, presenter from India, I have this question, which is more about the global South dimensions and how he sees the transformational power of this collective kind of faith into global North context like the one we experience here in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. I'm going to first hand this microphone to Robert in the room, and then we'll ask Vinay to respond.
Okay, so if I understand the question, it relates to the clearing and coalition building, et cetera, right? So I think of grounding the clearing in Blackness, Black bodies, Black disabled bodies, and from there you build coalitions, realizing why the clearing is needed, right? And so the context surrounding the clearing is ableist society and hatred and white supremacy, and really grounding yourself in that and the generative healing refuge space, the need to sigh and cry allows for coalition building with that in view, right? So the problem with coalition building is this thought to try and we all want to get free. Okay, yes. But the way that we do that is realizing and starting with someone and for a purpose, right? And so coalition building can really go out from the clearing because white supremacy is hurting us all. Capitalism is hurting us all, including white people, right? It's marring the imago Dei. It's causing disability, right? And so when we focus that way, then we can build coalitions together.
Thank you so much. Vinay, do you want to have a remark about the question regarding the Global South?
Hi, yeah, so my name is pronounced as Vinay, as you just correctly pronounced it. And I think your question was about how Global South can provide transformative and collective power of faith to Global North. Was that your question? Did I understood it correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I think I'm not sure if I can appropriately respond to this question, but some preliminary thoughts are that Global South is where the disability methodology has been imported to from the North. When I say methodology, I want to say that, you know, disability as a concept may not have always been there in a lot of these societies. Yes, bodily impairment and all these do exist, but they do not always exist in frames of oppression or pity, not always, or not all types of disability. So disability itself is never a uniform category. For instance, I can talk about India, and even people with bodily impairment and different kinds of impairment go on to be very active participants in their respective community. And sometimes they may or they may not identify as being disabled at different places. So when it's about the state welfare, they may identify as being disabled. At some other places, they may not highlight that aspect of their lives, the disabled aspect of their lives as well. And they may highlight their personhood more by saying that, you know, how we exist within families, or how I am important part of the network of kin group, or this is what I'm doing for the community. So I really believe that I think their location within the community, or their situatedness within the community, is what really matters to disabled people here, especially those with whom I have worked. I'm not sure about the later part of your question, if I can really answer that. Maybe I'll have to think, and sometime later I will get back to you if that's possible. Thank you.